Franc Milburn is a former Army paratrooper with the United Kingdom, a former intelligence officer. He's been producing threat assessments for corporations and governments for over 23 years, and he's recently developed an interest in UFOs, and he's written some peer-reviewed papers for top academic institutions covering UFOs and what they mean today.
You are listening to Exopolitics Today with Dr. Michael Salla, your source for the uncensored truth regarding the human, extraterrestrial, global, and political agenda. Click the like button and subscribe to this channel. And now, here's Dr. Michael Salla.
Well, welcome, Frank, to Exopolitics Today.
Thanks very much, Michael. Thank you for the invite.
Well, that was a very short intro, but I know you've done quite a bit. So is there anything you want to kind of tell us about your military background and your work in producing these threat assessments for different governments and corporations?
Yeah, sure. I mean, you pretty much nailed it. I joined the military in '87, and I did regular reserve service. I came out late 90s, in 1996. And during that time, I joined up as a soldier, and then I got picked up for university and then officer training. And then after the officer training, I went direct to military intelligence, where I spent 3 years. So I did a variety of things there, including working with the Royal Air Force, working with the Royal Navy, but I was attached to Army units principally. So that was very interesting. Then when I left, I did consultancy for a while, and I moved into kind of business risk management. And then I moved back into a sort of intelligence world, but in terms of commercial intelligence and security investigations. And then from there, I went to Iraq, and I spent about 4.5 years of my life there. And moving from doing sort of close protection, working with the likes of the US State Department, American Special Forces, and other agencies of the American government, I then moved into oil and gas and started running oil and gas security for 2 companies operating in the north of Iraq. And I've also done that across like North Africa and the Middle East, and also Mexico. So that's really where I do the kind of threat and risk assessments for companies, everything from before you go into a market to what happens if there's an emergency, a crisis. How do we get our people out? How do we do medical evacuations? How do we do business continuity? Those types of things. All kinds of planning for contingencies, really.
Well, great. Okay, so there was like an 8-year career in the UK military. And
yeah, that's right.
Anything you want to kind of share about any places that you served in?
Yeah, I mean, I did Northern Ireland with the UK military, but fundamentally I was based in the UK and Germany, but I was with units that were deployed worldwide.
Okay. Well, I watched the interview you did with Tim Ventura, and you described how you had a lifelong interest in UFOs, especially during your military days. So, yeah, I mean, you want to tell us how you developed that kind of interest, or what sparked that?
Yeah, certainly. I was in military intelligence at the time, and I ended up doing some of the 2 types of things. One was flying around, waiting AWACS as a platform in conjunction with the military unit that I was attached to, and actually doing, going on doing exercises and operations with the Royal Air Force as they were attached to units that I was working for. And so 2 very interesting things really came out of that. One was, or rather at that time, the main interesting that came out was learning from RAF pilots, aircrew effectively, and their navigators, very experienced people who had done the no-fly zone over Iraq. They'd done the first Gulf War. So these are very, very experienced pilots, tornado pilots. And so 4 people effectively told me, corroborated each other's stories about intercepting, trying to intercept UAP over the United Kingdom, and in the I believe it was in the mid-90s, and trying to shoot these craft down in order to take them down, and trying with different types of missiles, radio homing missiles, infrared homing missiles, and then closing very, very close to these craft and trying to shoot them down with the cannon, because the missiles just weren't working. They would initially have a lock on, then the missiles would leave the aircraft, and then they'd kind of go wild. They wouldn't hit the target. And then when they actually closed and put the rounds on the target, it was a bit like that case in 1980 Peru, when the guy was firing 23 millimeter shells from his fighter aircraft cannon into a UAP that was moving around his airfield, and the rounds just seemed to be absorbed by the craft and had no effect whatsoever. So it was that kind of scenario. So that really piqued my interest. But as I've said before, you've got other things to do at the time. So while that was an interesting story, it wasn't immediately in my job spec to do. So, I mean, I kind of investigated that way in terms of, asking around, but it wasn't something that was in my job spec to do. You're busy and you end up doing other things.
Well, the Daily Mail wrote a story about someone that you knew while you were serving with the UK military, and this colleague told you about a crash retrieval operation in northern England in the late 1980s. So you want to talk about that Daily Mail article and what you were told?
Yeah, sure. I mean, first of all, I wasn't actually serving with the guy. I met him after I left the military, but I established his bona fides because, we both knew the same people. And, you can tell very quickly from the way somebody speaks. If somebody says they're special forces, you know very quickly if they're bullshitting or not. If somebody says, they were in the parachute regiment or the Royal Marines, by the way they speak and by the way they act, whether they were or not. And that's even before you go and check with other people. So I checked the guy's bona fides, and we spent a lot of time together. We probably drank more beer than we should have done together. We became, sort of very close friends. Like I came to look up to him as kind of like an older brother. He was a very, very experienced guy, somebody that you'd literally trust with your life, very, very capable. And that's why he'd been given command of this unit effectively that was at that time known as the Increment, this is all from open source, where they basically take the very best guys from the various UK Special Forces units and they attach them for operational control purposes to SIS, at the British Secret Intelligence Service, or MI6, and they are effectively equivalent to effectively JSOC, Joint Special Operations Command, which would be like Delta Force and DevGru, SEAL Team 6. They do the same kind of thing that they do, the very kind of the most difficult kind of tier 1 missions. And they're also equivalent to, the CIA paramilitary division, which recruits ex-JSOC people. So these are guys who do the most difficult jobs around the world and the most deniable jobs. So he's not someone that would bullshit about this, and someone that I wouldn't expect to have an interest in UFOs at all. And in fact, in all our conversations, he didn't actually specifically seem to have an interest in UFOs. It was just he'd done some of the, some really crazy missions and very difficult missions around the world and nearly lost his life a number of times. But this was certainly, I got the impression from him, was the weirdest thing that he'd ever been asked to do. And so, yeah, he and his guys, he was in a team, and they were deployed to north of England, and they were asked to, secure a crash site. And then it appeared to them, from what I was told, that there were actually occupants of the craft. Now, he didn't say whether they were dead occupants in the craft or whether they'd looked inside and they'd seen that there were seats or, a body or something like that. I think it was tracks they noticed, and then they started going after them. And then he didn't say much more about it. Then they left some guys to secure the craft. And then once the craft was actually sort of taken back to a secure facility, and he didn't say where that was. And he also didn't describe what the aliens looked like, or the so-called, I don't know, the non-human entities, let's call them. Then he knew no more about it, effectively, because then, scientists had taken over from them. So he knew nothing about what happened to the craft or what happened to the occupants. He didn't tell me if they were live occupants or dead occupants, or if they were even recovered. But it was a very interesting story from someone that I would never expected to have told me a story like that, which made my ears prick up even more. And the other thing that's interesting is that if you look at the Project Condign report, which was written by Defense Intelligence 55, which is a sub-department of the Defense Intelligence Staff in the UK, they brought out this report that was written in 1999. It was released to the intelligence community in the UK in 2000. Then it was released to the public, the national records, in 2006. Now, this report had said that there'd never been crash retrievals. It also said that there'd never been interceptions of craft by the Royal Air Force. And then that's quite interesting because there were through the 50s, there were numerous encounters between military aircraft and UAP. And then you had the famous cases, which were the 1957 Milton Torres case, where he actually saw a craft on his radar that he was sent to intercept. And then you've got the 1962 Colonel George Filer, Major George Filer, was on a tanker aircraft, I believe, and they were asked to intercept a UFO, which is over the center of the UK. So, you know, you have to take the story for what it is, but it was very interesting. And then more recently, I think it was where does it say? The Minister of State for Defense, who's like the kind of junior defense minister, they said no, that there'd never been any interceptions and there'd never been any material that had been recovered by the UK government that had a sort of a non-human or exotic origin.
So during your career, you met people and spoke to people who told you about some of these things that they had seen, that you knew the UFO issue had some teeth to it. But I guess, like many of us, you were focused on your career, but then in 2017, it seems that this New York Times article that was published about the 2004 Nimitz incident kind of really opened the door to a lot of people like yourself, a lot of professionals, to suddenly begin talking about this openly without the fear of ridicule and being ostracized.
Yeah, I'd always had a lifetime interest in UAP and phenomena in general. I'm an experiencer. My mother's an experiencer, and she's actually experienced missing time, that kind of scenario. And my grandparents, both her parents, were also lifelong experiencers. So I've always been open to that side of things, as in not having a closed mind. But it was actually 2016, before the New York Times came out, that I started getting interested in it. And I mean, I'd kind of kept up with it, with books like, Timothy Good and by Nick Pope and Nick Redfern. I'd read maybe one or two of those a year, but it wasn't something that I was really actively researching myself. But then from sort of 2016 and 17, then, like you said, the New York Times article came out and the other ones. And then that really kind of made me up my research efforts. And I thought there's something really interesting going on here. It's the biggest story of all time, potentially. And, I need to know more about it. So that led me to doing more research, and then doing more research. Then I wanted to write papers about it. Having already written, papers on the Middle East for sort of globally ranked think tanks. And having before that done a lot of, geopolitical, risk reporting for companies. Where I'd be asked to produce, for example, for a transportation company once, they asked me what was the threat of ISIS in Iraq and the Middle East. So I produced something like, 50 or 60 page report on that and how it could impact their operations and how it would be likely to impact, their clients' operations. So report writing wasn't something new to me, and researching wasn't something new to me. It's just that the whole fascination with the UAP topic and phenomena in general just really kind of like took over, and everything else for me kind of became far, far less important.
Your experiences, I mean, you mentioned being an experiencer and your mother and grandparent being experiencers. So are we talking about abduction type experiences? What experiences did you have?
Well, my own ones I don't really like talking about in public. I've had both benign, and I've had very, very scary ones. But which I felt were benign. And then I've also had, I've experienced missing time, but I don't think I wouldn't claim to ever have been abducted. And I'm absolutely kind of like dead sure about that. So I would say my mother's had missing time as well. She's had what she claims to be like an abduction experience, although she won't remember now. And my grandparents, it was more like they were seeing, they're both dead now as well, but they lived in India for many, many years. So they're exposed to kind of this Eastern mysticism. And they came to believe, very much in kind of like the afterlife. So much so that then they moved away from India. They started staying in all these kind of houses, different old houses they'd stay in the UK where they live. And they'd start seeing, effectively the entities that were of, the spirit, I suppose you'd call it, of people who were long since dead. And, in places which were famous for those kind of, what you'd call hauntings or apparitions. And so much so, to the extent that they'd been together for so long, like over 40 years, that my grandmother told me, like many, many times. I mean, she was a very serious lady, but she told me that she actually saw my grandfather after he died, and that he's on several occasions, and that he actually spoke to her as well. You know, they actually, conversed. So I found that really, really incredible. But they were very, very close, and I believe very much in that. You can maintain a connection, especially if you have that very strong kind of love connection, that it can, maintain that link that you have, even when some person is actually like on another plane of existence. But that's just, my own kind of personal belief. So I was always very, very open-minded to the whole phenomenology thing. But what was interesting was getting into the UAP topic again, or the UFO topic, was I kind of started off coming at it from a sort of a military intelligence officer's mindset. Like, these are nuts and bolts craft. They're flying around in restricted airspace. They're entering, a country's air defense identification zone. Potentially, they're abducting people. So they're providing a source of threat. Potentially, they're causing aircraft to divert collisions, very dangerously. So they present an air safety risk. So I was thinking very much as a kind of military intelligence officer, and I still had it compartmentalized between UFOs and then like ghosts and cryptids. And then once you start getting into the whole Skinwalker Ranch thing, that you start realizing that there are all these different weird and wonderful phenomena that are all happening together. The cattle mutilations, the portals opening up, UFOs coming through, cryptids, poltergeist activity. I mean, it's all going on. So my interest kind of like widened very, very quickly from UAP as well, and to really look at phenomena in their entirety. And I think, as has been said, by people far more knowledgeable than myself, scientists, that you can't look at UAP just strictly in terms of nuts and bolts UFOs without looking at the wider aspects of the phenomenon.
17 paper or article in the New York Times and subsequent analyses or reports in other mainstream papers. Politico comes to mind, and there were a number of others. And these videos that were released and acknowledged by the US Navy as genuine UFOs that were photographed and tracked by pilots led to the creation of a UAP task force by the Navy. And in November 2020, you wrote a paper about that UAP task force for the Begin-Sadat Center for Strategic Studies. So you want to tell us about that paper and its importance?
Look, I can't validate it myself, but what I'll say is, when it comes from someone who's been head of the Israeli space program, and then it's validated that the person who's taking him seriously is his predecessor at the Israeli space program, and who's also a military man. I have to keep a total open mind. I mean, why would the guy come out and say that? I'm sure it's not just to sell his book, because potentially you're opening yourself up to all kinds of ridicule. Okay, one could argue he wasn't in the space program anymore, so like, what does he care? He's living on his pension or whatever. But it still seems a pretty extreme step to take if you didn't really feel very strongly about it. I mean, this isn't some kook. This is some guy who ran a very highly technologically advanced country's space program. So I have to take it seriously, what he says.
Yeah, I agree. I found, in terms of my own research, that when I interview professionals such as yourself and people like Haim Eshed, when they come out and say things like this, that professionals take years and decades to build up reputations, build up a public profile, and they're not going to throw that away by coming out with nonsense claims unless they really believe that happens. So I think the fact that Haim Eshed came out and actually said that there was this Galactic Federation in touch with the Trump administration, that kind of opened up things to this kind of secret world that exists of agreements and meetings and galactic diplomacy going on behind the scenes that has been happening for decades, but people, or especially UFO researchers, haven't taken it seriously. So I was delighted personally when Haim Eshed said this, because I thought, well, finally, here's someone you just can't dismiss, that there's something to this. You need to investigate.
Yeah, I agree. And I think also there's another aspect to it as well. I mean, he shut up very quickly after saying that, didn't he? I mean, you didn't hear anything from him after that. So I'm wondering, what did somebody like bend his ear and say to him, look, keep your mouth shut about it. Otherwise, why wouldn't he be out there like promoting his book and all the rest of it? He did the interview with Jeremy Corbell, and then you kind of like went, and there was a couple of articles, I think, in the press, and then he just went quiet.
Exactly. I think that is a sign that he was asked to stop talking or told to stop talking.
I mean, Michael, I'll be honest with you. I've always kept an open mind. Did U.S. presidents meet with other races? I mean, if you're open to the idea that there are other advanced races, and I'm not saying that they're necessarily ET, wherever they are, if it's from another plane of existence or another dimension, or they're deep earth dwellers or sea dwellers, whatever. They're not. I'm talking about non-humans who have advanced technology, wherever they're from. If you accept the possibility and the high probability of their existence based on all the reporting and the witness testimony and the radar and everything else, then is it so far-fetched that they might have actually met with representatives of the human race? And I don't think that is. And when you have someone like Chaim Eshed coming out and saying that, and I'd never been open to this whole kind of Galactic Federation thing before, but you have to kind of sit up and think, well, this guy's really serious, and he's coming out with this, and then somebody else is corroborating what he's saying, somebody whose judgment I trust. So, I mean, I still don't know, but it definitely makes me keep an open mind to it.
Yeah, it's a fascinating topic. Now, I just wanted to go back to your paper on the UAP task force, because I read that paper. I thought it was very well written, and you definitely covered the recent history behind the creation of this UAP task force by the Navy. And why I think that is very significant is that is the body that David Grush was asked to be a liaison for while serving for the National Reconnaissance Office, or he was doing some work with them, and previously I think with the National Geospatial Agency. So yeah, this UAP task force and David Grush's revelations about UFO crash retrieval operations and reverse engineering. What's the connection between that? Maybe you can explain the connection.
Well, I think Grush is, just a higher level person. I mean, obviously he's come out as a whistleblower, but he's made these allegations to two different sets of Inspector General, the Inspector General from the intelligence community and also from the Department of Defense, right? And if you download the forms and you look at the complaint format, it's like if you lie to them, then you're facing jail time, especially someone of his kind of like clearance level as well. I mean, the kind of link with it, I mean, the people that I was describing in the paper, people like Eric Davis, they hadn't kind of they hadn't spoken to the Inspector General or anything like that, but they'd been talking about, these crash retrieval programs. There was an email between Dr. Eric Davis and Dr. Jack Sarfati, where Eric Davis is saying to him, oh, people in the DOD know who you are. If you're looking to get your UAP propulsion theories funded, then you need to go and have a chat with the DOD and the Department of Energy's research boards and evaluation panels. So Grush is really is really a continuation of that, I see, and it just, I think, validates more what we knew at the time that I wrote those papers. I mean, obviously Elizondo had spoken about it as well, but to have someone of Grush's stature who'd been with those major agencies and who'd been liaison with the UAP task force, as you said, I mean, that's a really big deal. It's one thing saying it on a podcast. It's another thing, saying it to two sets of IG and in front of Congress, of course.
Yeah, I think he is a very important whistleblower for opening up the reality of these crash retrieval operations that have been going on in special access programs, and in particular under the control of major corporations. So in March of 2021, you wrote another paper, The American Development of UAP Technology, a fait accompli. So you want to tell us about that paper, and I'm particularly interested in what you learned about the role of corporations in this kind of secret reverse engineering that's been going on behind the scenes.
Yeah, that was really, I mean, there was a lot of that was based on around, the slide 9, which is from TTSA, which was describing, all the kind of different threats that the USA faced if it didn't kind of make an attempt to harness these technologies. And it was really looking at the feasibility of having a program which would effectively bring all the disparate UAP programs from the DOE, from the DOD, and from private aerospace companies, to bring them all kind of like under one roof, so that, okay, they'd still be separate programs, but if you had a stumbling block in one program and you couldn't talk to a metallurgist, or you couldn't talk to a physicist who might be able to help you because they weren't qualified to be in the program, then because they were outside of that compartmented program, then you actually have somebody on top coordinating. I could see where there's the stumbling blocks and go, okay, we need to inject this knowledge so that these people can make progress. Because as Eric Davis was describing in my first paper, you go years and years and years without being able to make a progress. You need to speak to somebody about metallurgy, for example, and you can't, because they don't have access to the program, so you're completely flummoxed. I didn't find out so much about aerospace and defense companies doing it, but I think now we've seen Grush has talked about Lockheed back in the 80th days wanting to divest themselves of a program, and I think the Admiral Wilson notes, which I was very skeptical of to start with, but more and more people that I trust have either had some anecdotal knowledge of it through someone who did know about it, and I think it's just more and more sort of realistic, and I think that, yes, very firmly, these companies, probably more than one, have these retrievals, to the extent that I believe that even crashed retrievals being affected not by the US government, but by contractors, sort of former JSOC types, or types of people like my mate, who told me about his crash retrieval, that there might be actually, sort of private venture crash retrievals going on, which may work, with some sort of level of cover from the government, and work in conjunction with the government, but are completely deniable, because they are still have a level of separation from the government, whereby papers can't be accessed, there's no oversight, etc. You can't do FOIA. I mean, look, a lot of people, they make a mistake with the FOIA thing anyway, because if something's secret and compartmented, you can FOIA it all you want, but you're not going to get it, right? But there's there are certain things you can get with FOIA, certain things that you can't get with FOIA. That's Freedom of Information Act. So yeah, I think the more we've gone on, what I wrote in those papers, the first one of 2020, the second one of 2021, I think now we've seen a continuation of the kind of the theories and the lines of thought that we had in those papers.
Well, there's this really interesting initiative that Senator Harry Reid was involved in, where he arranged for 20 plus, I think it was $23 million to be transferred over to the Bigelow Corporation to fund these 38 defense intelligence research documents that, to my mind, they tried to, those documents were really an attempt to bridge the gap between what's happening in the classified world and what's happening in the open source science world. So, yeah, what's your view about those 38 defense DIRD docs that were sponsored with congressional funding? I think it was 2007, 2008.
Yeah, there's defense intelligence reference docs that were basically, it was Earth Tech, which was subcontracting to, which is a subcontractor of Bigelow Aerospace Advanced Space Studies, which was the contractor for the Defense Intelligence Agency. So they had a kind of level of cutoff. They could go around and ask these scientists, but the scientists didn't know ultimately what the papers were going to be for. But I think exactly they are what Eric Davis explained as saying, that they were those guys at ORSAT, the Advanced Aerospace Weapons System Applications Program, in 2008, they were trying to extrapolate out to 2050 what the technologies would be, so that they could approximate the capabilities of the Tic Tac. Okay, so that's very much what they were doing, and and as he said, to kind of have American engineering and physics and science prowess at a level by 2050, whereby they could approximate the capabilities of the Tic Tac or UAP if they became hostile. And also, if you read the kind of between the lines to that as well, it's to get there, before China and Russia do. And I always like to put in, and as I did in the first paper, Xi Jinping in Beijing wants to complete the great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation by 2049, which basically aims to see China as being the preeminent economic, military, diplomatic and technical and financial power in the world. So I would imagine that it would be very interesting to the Chinese as well. And we know that there's some anecdotal kind of evidence that they have interests in UAP and UAP technology, as do the Russians. So, and you've written about that in your book, about Chinese and Russian UAP programs. But yeah, I mean, if you're aiming to be the preeminent military power in the world, you'd be absolutely crazy not to be looking at these beyond next gen technologies. I personally, though, come down the side of, well, if China and Russia had deployable squadrons of 1, 2, 3, or even one observable craft, then China would already be in Taiwan, and Russia, if they had it, they'd already be at the English Channel, knocking on Britain's door. So I don't think anybody's got it deployable yet. And if the Americans had it, then they wouldn't be worried about being at the comparatively weakest point since World War II in comparison to major adversaries that they've ever been. Relatively, America is at an ebb in terms of its national power and national sources of power. So I think now, if they had deployable UAP, now would be a time to kind of pull them out the bag. And also, of course, the other issue is they're spending billions and billions on things like F-15X, on next generation air dominance platform, on the F-35. Why would they be spending billions and billions on those? If you could be spending it on UAP. And any aerospace and defense company, if you could say, right, I can give you total spectrum dominance and make you effectively, number one undisputed military power in the world across every spectrum of warfare, that would be the sale of the century, and any government would want to have that. But that's just my own personal view.
I mean, looking at that issue, I mean, what I've found is that the CIA, the intelligence community in particular, like the NRO, I think that they, for decades, have been the biggest beneficiary of these secret space programs, or these kind of like corporate reverse engineering efforts that have succeeded to some extent with anti-gravity craft, whereas the regular military, the Pentagon, have been kind of kept out of it. So I suspect that that's part of the reason that the intelligence community, the CIA in particular, because that's its power base. If all of a sudden all this tech was made available to the Pentagon, because I think it even goes back to the days of President Kennedy. I mean, President Kennedy knew that the real power struggle within the USA was not between the government and the people, it was really between the intelligence community and the Pentagon over the control of covert programs. And so if you've got all of these reverse engineered technologies that are being used in clandestine programs, I mean, would the CIA want to share that with the Pentagon and, have corporations kind of like freely share that with the Pentagon, or just kind of like keep it all wrapped up in the highest classification categories that are possible? That's my view. I don't know if you agree with that or you have a different perspective.
I think in terms of, I keep an open mind, Michael, always. In terms of internal power competition, certainly, CIA, we know, have been heavily involved. DOD have been heavily involved. Department of Energy have been heavily involved. Those are all kind of different power bases there. They all have their own intelligence capabilities as well. There's a general competition anyway between like DIA and CIA in terms of overseas intelligence collection. But I think overall, that's it will be such an instrument of national power that you'd have to have it. And that would have to override competition rather than having the sort of bureaucratic politics model. I believe that would have to be more of a rational actor model. But then again, there's so much infighting. If you look at like the recent, just within the DOD, the recent reports, the Inspector General report on how UAP reporting wasn't working, the historical record report that we just got from RO, and then the 2003, the last report that we got from RO and the ODNI. I mean, they're saying conflicting things effectively. So even within the DOD, you're getting like confusing messaging. I think that you have to keep an open mind with it, but I also think that there's something else I've been hearing, that you also, as the state, effectively, would you want aerospace and defense companies to have like this unbridled power, because then potentially they might be able to eclipse your own power of the state? That's another thing that I've been looking at. But I personally think if I had to come down on it, I would say, yes, they may well have these, some reverse engineered craft, or even a complete craft that they've actually, inherited, or, that they found effectively, and that they can use them, but maybe they don't work that well. I've heard that the kind of knockoff ones, they don't work as well as kind of genuine UAP. So would you want to use those sort of over enemy territory, where if something goes wrong, you're going to end up losing it to China or Russia? Probably not. So I'd still have to come down on the side of, just me personally, that they don't have deployable squadrons yet because they haven't figured out the tech completely yet. And I'd have to go with Eric Davis when he says, that they're extrapolating it out to 2050 to try and get to that point where they can approximate the technology of the Tic Tacs. And also Lou Elizondo, when I was writing about it in my second paper, and he was saying, there needs to be kind of like a Manhattan Project style program to bring all the disparate UAP programs from the different areas of government under one roof, so that we can make these progressions. And then also what Eric Davis was saying about how, it's so compartmentalized that, you might have this project, they're looking at UAP and they can't figure it out. So they leave it for 10 or 15 years. They come back, they try and look at it again. But, you can't go and talk to the world leading expert in a particular field because they're not read into the program. So to cut all a long story short, I have to say, I still don't believe that they have deployable sort of squadrons of these craft. They may have they may have a few that work, like David Grush has said. They may have 12. Some of them may work, some of them may not work. I keep an open mind.
Fair enough. Well,
because at the end of the day, I don't know.
There's this declassified Kona Blue document that you sent me, and that's an effort by the Department of Homeland Security to find out whether any of these UAPs or UFOs have been retrieved, and whether there's been any kind of attempt to study or reverse engineer the text. So you want to kind of tell us what's the significance of this Kona Blue document?
Yeah, well, it's absolutely fascinating because if you look at it, there's about 56 pages in the release from ARO. Now, the first thing that I say about it is Sean Kirkpatrick, in that interview that he gave recently, he was sort of trying to say that Kona Blue was like the definitive UAP program that that whistleblowers were talking about. Well, it wasn't at all, because it was a non-starter, and the documents that we've got are effectively at proposal stage. It's like slide packs that the people have done to try and propose it and put it forward, and to get like the buy-in from the senior sort of relevant management within Department of Homeland Security. Now, it's interesting because if you look at Skinwalkers at the Pentagon, the Lakatsky, Kelleher, and George Knapp book, they actually talk about Kona Blue, because they talk about when they went to, when they were trying to get a continuation of ORSAP, they were trying to sort of get the Department of Homeland Security to take it on effectively. And if you look at Skinwalkers at the Pentagon, they go and they talk to Homeland Security, and it's got the same people that they talk to who then go about, trying to set up Kona Blue. But it says in the Skinwalkers at the Pentagon book, and the three authors weren't allowed to mention the name Kona Blue, that they say that these DHS, Department of Homeland Security senior personnel, they're going and talking to other agencies and trying to get buy-in from them, and also talking to contractors, private companies, and they're just getting doors slammed in their faces. And then eventually it gets to the point, if you look at the documents in Kona Blue, it gets to the point that they put it all forward, everything that they want to do, and then the Department of Homeland Security decides, actually, the senior manager said, actually, no, this isn't for us. We're a new agency, and we don't want to be made to look foolish, I think, effectively. And also as well, they couldn't get the buy-in from other agencies, because if you look in the document, it says very much that it's going to be like interagency. And then if you look at the document itself, which is effectively, it's a combination of like different slide packs that they put in there, and as well as some letters, for trying to get the authorization, and the letter saying, actually, no, we're going to shut down Kona Blue and we're not going to, progress it to the next stage. But it was actually very ambitious. It was taking on the same kind of way that you would look at a UAP program as laid out in the appendices in Skinwalkers at the Pentagon, where they lay down, what you need for an effective UAP program. The funding, I think, by the fourth year, was going to be around like $35 to maybe $50 million, which was, more than the $22 million that was allocated to ORSAT. And they were not just going to be looking at Skinwalker Ranch; they were also going to be looking at, like Morley Wood, which I think is in Tennessee, and also the San Juan Valley, right, in Colorado. So they were going to expand the nature of what they were looking at, and then they were going to have medics on board to check and see that if people were getting injured in conjunction with a contact with anomalous phenomena, and also their families as well. I think that's, if you read between the lines in terms of like the hitchhiker effect. So I think it was very, very interesting. And there's a lot more that you can read into it. I mean, if you read Hunt for the Skinwalker, and also Skinwalkers at the Pentagon, and the most recent book that they wrote, and I forget the name of it off the top of my head, but I've read all three. If you read Skinwalkers at the Pentagon, I mean, they mention threat in conjunction with the phenomena at Skinwalker Ranch, like quite frequently throughout the book. So I can understand why Homeland Security would be interested in going down that route, and in trying to be sort of like the repository to actually have the materials, to have the investigators, researching the UAP, the portals, the phenomena, the cryptids, and all the rest of it, because they present sources of threat to the integrity. So if you have, for example, a portal opening up, right, then that's a threat, because it presents the risk that if somebody else has that technology, or you have these cryptids coming through, then that's a threat to Homeland Security, because Homeland Security is about protecting borders and about protecting the country. And border security is like a big part of that. That's why you have, the Customs and Border Patrol, et cetera, and you have the US Coast Guard, a part of Homeland Security, because that's their mission. But now it gets really interesting, because if you start looking and you think, why would what capabilities would Homeland Security have? I mean, they have access to a mountain of laboratories, including the one that looks like infectious diseases, which is on that island. I was looking at earlier. They also have a relationship, very, very interestingly, not only with private industry, but they also have a shared laboratory initiative with the Department of Energy, which I found was very, very interesting. And that isn't something that happened recently. That happened after 9/11. DOE and Homeland got together to start collaborating. And you can see, if you go on the Department of Homeland Security website, if you go to the science and technology section, you can see all the collaborations that they have, all the laboratories they have. So, with the kind of funding that they're expecting to get once they got to the sort of 35 to 50 million dollars per year stage, I think, they would have been capable of funding a very, very capable effort, which brings me to the conclusion that that's why somebody wanted Kona Blue killed, because it was threatening somebody else's program, where the goodies, where the craft are, where the bodies are, and they didn't want something as well funded as Kona Blue, which would have, the scrutiny of Congress, basically trying to elbow its way in. That's my take on it.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think the doors were shut, that Kona Blue, or the Department of Homeland Security, tried to get access to any departments, any agency that had information on these crashed UFOs, and whether any technologies had been recovered for exactly what you were saying. And what I took, my main takeaway from this was that I thought that this was very similar to what happened in the 1950s with, or actually even earlier, the 1940s with the FBI. I mean, there's a number of FOIA documents that show that J. Edgar Hoover was very interested in the reports of UFOs that crashed, but he was being denied access by the Air Force, or that his agents, the special agents, were being denied access. That the FBI special agents were basically tasked with kind of minor security assignments to just make sure that people wouldn't talk about the issue. But in terms of like what was actually being recovered, the hardware and all of that, the FBI was denied. And Hoover was very upset about that and expressed it in these documents that were released. So I'm not surprised that you find the same thing happening with, 50 years later with the Department of Homeland Security.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you're right, and it goes back to your points you're making about the bureaucratic politics model. Because the American government is so large and sprawling, and I mean the departments themselves are so large. So even within, I said, as we were discussing, within like DoD, you're going to have competing interest. DIA versus a combatant commands, etc., etc. So yeah, I think that bureaucratic politics model is there, and if you are custodian, whether you're DOE or CIA or Department of Energy of these, some either a retrieval program, a reverse engineering program, both of them, you're not going to want some new kind of upstart department, muscling its way in, because again, it's funding, it's the secrecy, it's the prestige of having it, even if people don't know about it. It's your crown jewels that you don't want to leave. You want to have that for against a very rainy day, and also keep it under wraps because of all the nasty things that have been going on over the years. So if you have Homeland Security come in and they get a congressionally a sort of a well surveilled program that's under congressional oversight, and they're going to start picking through the books effectively, and they're going to see all the nasty nefarious things that have been done over the years, the financial things, the murders, the threats, the harassment, and all the rest of it, the destroying of reputations, the manipulation of the media, and just the kind of the blatant lying effectively to the American people and also the people of the world. So yeah, you're not going to want to have Homeland Security picking its way through that.
Wanting to get your opinion about the research of people like Leonard Stringfield, who did spend quite a bit of time interviewing dozens of military whistleblowers, insiders, who were talking about these crashed UFOs going all the way back to Roswell, that there were secret reverse engineering programs. And so he put out a lot of information. So what do you think of Leonard Stringfield and his information on crashed UFOs and reverse engineering efforts?
I think highly credible. I mean, although he didn't actually come out with, okay, this is the, here are the craft and here are the bodies, and I wouldn't expect him to. I think it's highly credible in terms of the wide variety of sources that he approached. So yeah, I think a masterpiece, really.
And Philip Corso, Lieutenant Colonel Philip Corso, he says that in from 1961 to 63, he headed up a small research and development unit within the Pentagon that was really in the business of helping corporations reverse engineer some of the captured extraterrestrial technologies. So, what do you think about his kind of revelations? Not only that these crashed UFO materials had been retrieved, but also that even in the early 60s and late 50s, the military was already working with corporations to reverse engineer some of this technology.
Yeah, I think quite possibly. I mean, I wasn't there, so I don't know, but yeah, I mean, quite possibly. Quite possibly.
All right. Well, you already touched on this, but I want to raise it again from the perspective of, I mean, you don't think that the hardware or whatever's been retrieved has been successfully reverse engineered yet, and that's something that Eric Davis and others have been saying, that yes, this stuff has been retrieved, but it's too difficult to understand and reverse engineer. Well, if we accept the revelations from Corso and the research of Leonard Stringfield showing that crash retrieval operations and reverse engineering studies date all the way back to the 40s and 50s. I mean, here we are in the 2020s. I mean, are we really going to accept that in the 70 years of secret research and studies and acquisition of these technologies, that they haven't been able to reverse engineer these to actually build operational fleets of flying saucers, flying triangles, and so forth?
Sure. Well, I think there's another way of looking at that. The technology is maybe like so far ahead, and that in terms of it's like, if you took, say, the kind of classic one is, if you take like an iPad or an iPhone back to, Galileo or something like that, would they be able to figure out what it is? Even if you explain to them, would they be able to get it to work? No, they wouldn't, because there's certain things that you need to have to make it work, certain technologies that you need to have to make it work, certain understandings of energy and electricity, circuitry that you'd need to have to make it work. And I just think, there's the possibility that it's just, we're not at that stage yet where we have that capability to understand it, because we don't have the relevant technologies yet. And there's something to be said for that. I mean, if you look at, how many countries in the world right now can actually produce by themselves like a fifth or, even a sixth gen craft, you're talking very few. United States, the United Kingdom, France, Korea and Indonesia are sort of producing like a fifth gen jet. China's ones, they're a bit dubious because the engines, and they're not approaching quite the capabilities like F-22, F-35. The Su-57 that the Russians have, it's sort of more like a 4.5 gen jet rather than the true, fifth gen. So how many countries can actually produce a fifth or a sixth gen jet for a start with? And if you look at, weapons eventually get used, right? Whether it's the crossbow, whether it's the cannon, whether it's the, the cruise missile, like you had, in World War II, the ballistic missile, the atomic bomb, the stealth aircraft, weapons end up getting used. But there's a very long flash to bang time between you start designing an aircraft and you actually get it into service. If we look at, for example, the stealth fighter, that was designed with kind of like 70s technology. I think the first test flight was in 1977. It didn't have its combat debut until the first Gulf War in 1991, and nobody knew about it. And then one got shot down over the former Yugoslavia. Yeah, some people remember, by a very cunning Bosnians, by a very cunning Serb surface-to-air missile battery commander. But that aside, it still took all that time from 1977 to 1991 to actually get it, designed, built in the air, and then actually have, deployable fleets of them. And the point that I'm making is, one, the long time that it takes to bring an airframe, whether it's an aircraft or, potentially a UAP, it's going to take even longer to bring an airframe into production, because there's a very long time from having the conception of the idea to actually having deployable squadrons of them, and with the weapon systems that they're going to carry as well. So that's why I would still tend to agree with the likes of Eric Davis, Lou Elizondo and co, that, we're not quite there in terms of approximating them.
Well, I want to bring up another kind of like historical case that does lend itself to looking at this question of whether or not operational craft were developed decades ago. And that is this 1933 UFO crash in northern Italy. David Grush pretty much confirmed that really did happen. And we do know that at that time, Winston Churchill actually had a very active or very close relationship with the Italian dictator Benito Mussolini. And Mussolini had in his possession a crashed UFO. Italy was one of the leading aviation powers of the world at that time. Winston Churchill was friends with Mussolini, and Churchill was very interested in kind of naval aviation. So I just want to kind of like get your view on whether or not Winston Churchill knew about Mussolini getting possession of a crashed UFO, and then later on, when Italy and Germany began to, they formed the Axis powers. They formed an alliance, and they began to collaborate on flying saucer programs. And we know that actually was real because there are these newspapers by a former Italian official, Giuseppe Belluzzo, that came out in 1950 or 52. And there was also, I think, Rudolf Schreiber, another German scientist, that confirmed that, yes, Italy and Germany were actively developing flying saucer technologies. And there are a bunch of FBI and CIA documents that have interviews with engineers and technicians from different countries, showing that the Nazis were actually building prototypes and testing these prototype flying saucers, and this is during the Second World War. So yeah, I mean, you want to comment on that?
Well, we know that I've been told by someone, Amy Eskridge, right? She's dead now, so I can talk about it. Her father is a rocket scientist, Richard Eskridge. He worked for NASA. He's one of the top guys in the field. She's obviously got that highly intelligent gene. She said that her family effectively were trained to some extent by these German scientists that came over under Operation Paperclip, and that the Germans were not just interested in rocketry, and that they obviously helped the American space program to a massive extent, Werner von Braun, etc. But they also brought knowledge of UAP as well. The problem that I have with whether they had workable UAP in World War II, true UAP that maybe had like 1, 2, or 3 observables, is that they lost the war. Okay, so if you look as well at the German harnessing of jet engine technology, they were very, very late bringing that online into the war. So I'm kind of doubtful about the UAP angle, basically because they lost the war. So I think that I just believe that the technology is so complicated. I mean, flying triangles, for example, have been seen since, I think the first, David Marler talks about in his book, I think the first one was seen like in 1894 or something like that. So that's a good few years, right? Before the Wright brothers, before Skunk Works, before the US Air Force, all the rest of it. These things, I believe, they've been around for a long, long time. We're not, and they seem to, have the same kind of tech, the same kind of characteristics, but I just don't see that we are at that point of having that technology yet, or truly being able, harnessing it. So I'd still come down on the side of Dr. Eric Davis and co, who say that, it's still something that it's an aspiration that we have rather than a capability. But look, hey, they may have ones that fly. Maybe they don't fly that well, or they're not operated that well, or they don't know how to operate them that well, that they can actually, or it's one thing to fly it, but then to actually reproduce it, and then to have deployable, fleets of them. So, I mean, look, the Blackbird was, the SR-71, that was kept secret for years and years and years, but eventually, it comes out. And I think if you had these things, it would come out eventually that, if there was like, a squadron of them, like there were a squadron or 2 of Blackbirds flying around, it's going to come out eventually. And in terms of war machines, things that like fire missiles, drop bombs, like the stealth fighter, the stealth bomber, the B-1, the B-2, these things come out eventually because they end up getting used in war. And I think if we had these capabilities, then we would have used them in war. We would have used them in the Vietnam War. The Americans lost something like 10,000 jet aircraft and fixed-wing aircraft and helicopters during the Vietnam War. If they had capabilities of UAP, they wouldn't have had a problem with North Vietnamese fighters and Russian and Chinese supplied surface-to-air missiles. They wouldn't be deploying, aircraft in the first Gulf War, which were built with 70s technology. They just wiped the floor with UAP, with 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 observable or 6 observable craft. So that's where I'm coming from at it in terms of the technology.
Well, there was a report, I think it was 1947, that came out of Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, and they were reporting on what were the origins of the UFOs that were being sighted. And of course you had Project Sign, and they came out with a report and said the extraterrestrial hypothesis was in their initial report. Then the Hoyt and Vandenberg rejected that, but they were saying that the only Earth technologies that have been observed that approximate the performance of the UFOs were Nazi German craft. So if you think about it, I mean, just logically, so just imagine that 1933, the Italians get a crash UFO. Eventually, the Italians start to share this with the Germans. And by the end of the Second World War, 12 years later, maybe they don't have operational fleets of these things, but they've developed a few prototypes that they're testing and they're flying and they're trying to weaponize. And maybe they don't succeed in operationalizing these in time to win the war. But the American intelligence, British intelligence know about this. So if in 12 years the Nazi Germany and Italy could come up with, say, prototypes that they could flight test and they tried to weaponize, but they ran out of time, then in the 70 plus years since Roswell, I mean, I find it very hard to believe that no progress has been made on operationalizing these to the extent that we have fleets of these things that are being used by the Navy, the Air Force, that are very highly classified, and they operate mainly off-planet. Because at the end of the day, if you have an operational fleet of these things and you want to keep it secret from, say, China or Russia, you would deploy them off-planet. So, yeah, I mean, that's my view. So if you want to respond or elaborate.
Yeah, I mean, look, if Italy or Germany, they had a recovered craft, and or they managed to get that working, and or they managed to start reverse engineering, and then and or the Americans get, or the Brits, or both of them get their hands on it, then yeah, you'd expect that if they got their hands on it, there would have been some kind of progress in sort of 70 years plus, especially if it's the reverse engineered kind, because they're improving on something that's man-made. I just don't know. I wasn't there. And I don't know, I just err on the side of caution with that. I think that, if we had these fleets of craft that could operate off-world like that, then we'd have given China and Russia a hammering a long time ago. And I say we, like the United States, the Western Alliance, because weapons of war are meant to be used. And when when your global supremacy effectively is threatened, and America's at its weakest point that it's ever been since World War II. That's when you start pulling the tricks out the bag.
Well, just to pursue this a little further, what if the Pentagon really didn't have all of these operational fleets, that the operational fleets were, say, controlled by the intelligence community, the CIA, the NRO? Would they use them for war, or would they use them for covert operations?
Well, I mean, there's a fine line between the two, but I think, you're still, even if that were the case, you still have to have infrastructure for these fleets of craft. You still have to have personnel to build them, to maintain them, to man them, to load them, all those types of things. And you'd still be seeing things on radar, which you wouldn't necessarily, by the military, which you wouldn't be able to explain away easily if they are, displaying kind of like exotic characteristics. So I think you're going to come unstuck somewhere.
This brings me to this CIA Office of Global Access, and that was discussed in that Daily Mail article. I think that you were, I can't remember if you wrote it or if you were interviewed in it. But yeah, you want to tell us about this CIA Office of Global Access and its role in 9 UFO crash retrieval operations?
Yeah, that was actually, Chris Sharp. He was the one who actually did that for the Daily Mail. So, that's really kind of his bag. I thought it was very interesting, but it didn't surprise me. But I think, I get the feeling that it's not just the CIA doing it, that, as I alluded to before, there's elements which are funded by DOD doing it, and there may even be, sort of outsourced, private contractors working for aerospace and defense companies who are not only engaged in the crash retrievals, but they're also engaged in the operations that, target people who speak out and who maintain the operational security surrounding those operations. So no, it didn't surprise me when it came out. But, Chris Sharp, the very best person to ask about that, because, he wrote the article and, he interviewed the people. So.
Yeah, that definitely matches with what I have been told. In fact, there was a U.S. Army veteran. I don't know if you've heard of him, Clifford Stone. He was with the U.S. Army from 1969 to 1991, and he says that while he was with the U.S. Army, he would be asked to go on a temporary duty assignment with the Air Force, where he was part of these elite UFO crash retrieval teams. And I think he described participating during his 22 years. He said, I think it was there was clearly a dozen alien spacecraft that had been retrieved, that he was part of the advanced team, that his job, he was trying to go in, assess the situation, if there was a need for first aid to be administered to any of the EBEs, that he was trained to be able to do that. So, yeah, what do you know anything about Clifford Stone and his claims?
I keep an open mind about Clifford Stone. I can't verify myself, but I think if he's talking about 12 craft, that's pretty much what Grush has said, isn't it?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of similarities there. Now, there's this UAP Disclosure Act that was proposed by Chuck Schumer, and there was initially, when it was kind of rolled out in the latter part of 2023, the UFO community were very excited. They thought, wow, this is finally the day's come where this is going to be taken seriously. And then in the final session, or the reconciliation committee to sort out the differences between the House of Representatives and the Senate, it was gutted. So what do you think? Is that pretty much a done deal, or do you think it's going to come back again in another form?
I think there's a good chance they'll come back in another form. But I mean, Congress have got a lot of other things going on. It's an election year. You've got China, China, Taiwan going on, the whole South China Sea thing, the Indo-Pacific in general, the Middle East, Israel, Iran, Syria, Russia and Ukraine. There's a lot of other things going on. But in a nutshell, I'd say, that whole UAP Disclosure Act, that getting nailed, was, the military-industrial intelligence complex, trying to throw a spanner in the works and make sure that, these things don't come out. Or rather, that they don't, not that they come out to the public, not that they don't come out to the public, but that they don't make it to, congressional oversight, and they manage to keep them hidden. So that's effectively an assault on American democracy, because at the end of the day, you're supposed to have congressional oversight of these things, however secret they are.
Well, the British have a very interesting kind of history when it comes to this UFO topic. I know about Prince Philip's interest in the some of the UFO cases, and apparently he even got to. I think he almost had a meeting with an alleged extraterrestrial that wanted to meet him. And so, do you know anything about Prince Philip's interests in UFOs, extraterrestrial life, and whether his son, the president?
Well, absolutely, yeah. Sorry, please go ahead.
Well, and I was just going to ask about his son, King Charles. Does King Charles have a similar interest?
I'm not sure about Prince Charles, although he is a pilot as well, and you'd assume that, because he's been brought up, in that environment, that he would be. But I can't speak with any confidence on that. But there's actually a really gleaming source that was right at the heart of the royal family, and that was this guy called Peter Horsley. So he's this highly decorated World War II mosquito fighter bomber pilot, and he actually makes it all the way up to, before he dies, he makes it all the way up to 3-star rank, and he is made equerry to. He joins the royal household in 1949, and imagine when you become an equerry, it's a highly privileged position, because whichever royal you're like the military aide to, you effectively control their appointments, you control their visits. Effectively, you control access to them by people, because a lot of people want to meet them, right? They've got busy schedules. So he's introduced into the royal household in 1949. He's already a squadron leader by then. He's now flying fighter jets, and he is an extra equerry to Princess Elizabeth. And then between 1953, he becomes a full-time equerry to Duke of Edinburgh, and he stays there until 1956. And again, it's a very privileged position. So he is absolutely an amazing source. He writes this book, which is called Sounds from Another Room, Memories of Planes, Princes, and Phenomena. And there's a whole chapter in it on UFOs, and about his relationship with the prince, and how the prince basically gives him the go-ahead, and he's got access, as he's like a squadron leader and he's moving up through the ranks, to go and investigate UAP reports that are of interest. All the prince says is, says is, right, I can't give you like official backing, and I can't have anything that will come back and embarrass me. But they want to know about the report. So this guy, effectively, he becomes like a assistant chief of the air staff. So he's got access to all these UAP reports which are coming in. And he says, there's about 5% of them that we can't explain. And he's talking to other people like General Boyd Browning, Lieutenant General Boyd Browning, who's the father of the British Airborne Forces in World War II. He's talking to another member of the royal household, who's a lieutenant commander in the Royal Australian Navy. There's also Lord Dowding, who is, the chief of the Royal Air Force. There's also Admiral Sir Hill Norton, who's former chief of the defence staff. So you've got very high levels of the British establishment who are interested in UAP, and not just, Prince Philip. And then the this guy, Horsley, has this amazing encounter through another senior military officer who introduces him to another general. And this general introduces him to someone else who invites him to a party at her house. And he ends up having a conversation with somebody who he is convinced is an extraterrestrial, this guy called, who introduced himself as Mr. Janus. Now, Janus is an interesting name because it's the Roman god of like duality, because it's got like the two-headed god, two-faced god. He has this conversation with this guy, and this is an RAF officer who's become 3-star, who's moving to 3-star rank, becomes deputy commander of Strike Command, which is all of Britain's offensive air power, effectively, right? That's his last job. So this is a very, very trusted guy with high integrity, and also who's intelligent and a very capable pilot to have got there in the first place, an officer. So he has a conversation with this guy, and he's absolutely convinced that this is an extraterrestrial. And the guy's basically saying that, human beings aren't ready yet to go, you're getting the technologies to go out into space, but like you're so savage and backward the way that you're killing each other, that we, the observers, as he calls it, we worry about you coming out into space because you're going to see everybody with suspicion and you're going to bring your death and destruction with you. So that was very, very interesting. Now, that book, I strongly recommend it, Sounds from Another Room, because it's absolutely phenomenal. There's a whole long chapter on the British establishment, including the Prince Philip, and high members of senior officers who are all taking the UAP in the UK very, very seriously. And they actually, this guy Horsley, because he's got carte blanche by the chief of the air staff to basically go and speak to anybody that he wants in the Royal Air Force about UAP. He actually pings in the 1960s. He pings this squadron leader a squadron leader or a group captain who's at the British Embassy in Washington, D.C. And he says, look, can you ask the Americans what they're doing about it? And the guy comes back and he just goes, yeah, they're interested in it and they're following it and they're doing reports on it, but they don't want to talk about it, which I thought was very interesting.
Wanted to get your take on these claims by various military Air Force veterans that talk about UFOs being sighted near nuclear facilities and shutting down the missiles, and that this has happened on a number of occasions in the US, and I believe has also happened in the Soviet Union. So, I mean, what do you make of that? I mean, is this UFOs engaging in behavior that signals that they're a threat to, say, US or global national security, or are the UFOs, the beings piloting those, really trying to warn us about the dangers of thermonuclear weapons?
Okay, first of all, I believe they're highly credible. You've got like the book UFOs and Nukes, which is like an amazing piece on it. I've also spoken to people, like Bob Salas. Obviously, you don't let somebody have control of nukes if they're a delusion anyway, and he's an absolutely 100% legit witness. And then you've got the accounts that have come out, from Thread 3 that George Knapp brought back from the Soviet Union, and also mentioned by not mentioned by British military intelligence, but these accounts of the Russians having problem with UAP and them overflying nuclear bases, the whole thing that the Brentwaters, Rendlesham Forest incident in the UK. Yeah, these things are happening big time. Eric Davis talks about them, the Northern Tier sightings. Absolutely no doubt in my mind. Are they a threat? Well, you have to ask yourself in what respect. If you were Russian and you had and a UAP appeared and it started and it caused the countdown on your nukes to start, right, as happened in the former Ukraine. If it had an American stars and stripes or a US Air Force roundel on the side of it, then yeah, you consider it a threat. Same as the Americans. If you had a UAP which is shutting down your nukes in 1967 or later in the 70s, and if it had Chinese or North Korean stars on the side or Russian stars, you definitely consider it to be a threat. Now, very interestingly, there's 3 papers that have just been released over the course of the last year by the Scientific Coalition for UAP Studies, which I'm also a member of. And they've actually looked at, all these sightings from 1945 in the US to 1975 where the data is available. Really nice charts. They've done all the statistics on it. Really great work. And they looked at everything from, the levels of activity at the sort of production phase, the assembly phase, the deployment of missiles phase, everything that goes along in the sort of the nuclear life cycle of these things, from bombs to missiles. And they came down that no, it was like more interest, that it wasn't a threat. I think you'd have to take it on a case-by-case basis. If I were an intelligence officer, and I had that hat on, and I said something is shutting down like your strategic assets, and I'd say, that's, for me, it looks like intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, if it's got the capability to shut things down. Now, people say, oh, well, they're doing it for a benign reason. They're warning us about nukes. Well, whoever they are, they didn't stop the Americans bombing Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and they didn't stop the the sort of the hundreds and hundreds, I think it's over 1,000 nuclear detonations that have taken place, atmospheric, above ground, below ground, surface, subsurface. They haven't stopped those happening. So I find the argument about, whoever they are here to help us, a bit difficult, because we don't know who they are or where they are from, or even maybe when they're from. But, again, I keep an open mind. But there's certainly, it would indicate me as an intelligence officer, if something is appearing, it's gone right into your airspace, right inside the continental United States, well inside, it's evaded aircraft, interceptors, or they haven't even, pinged that they're there, the radars. They arrive on scene, they shut down nukes. That was definitely what I'd call a demonstration of capabilities. And I would have to say, being on the technologically inferior side, I would find that quite intimidating and worrying.
Now, you've discussed both the kind of alien abductions, as David Jacobs has reported that these are largely unfriendly and threatening in some way, and you've also discussed the friendly alien contacts, as reported by Timothy Good in a number of his books, Alien Contact and so forth. So what do you think in terms of these reports about a spectrum of extraterrestrial races interacting with humanity, ranging from the friendly to the unfriendly, and in terms of the threat assessment that you do? I mean, how do you frame that?
Yeah, well, on a case-by-case basis. I mean, there's people who will say they have benign experiences, and I've had both, right? So they'll say, right, yeah, I'm an experiencer because it was a good experience. Then you'll have people who have a terrifying abduction experience. So obviously that's malign. So if somebody came into your house, terrifies you, kidnaps you, does experiments on you that are very painful, if a human being did that to you, they'd get banged up, wouldn't they, for like assault and battery and kidnapping and all the rest. So that's malign. But then you get people who get taken, they claim to be taken away, and I find a lot of these people very credible, and to have things done to them which are painful, but they come to have some kind of communion with whoever they are, and kind of like accept it and don't view it as malign anymore, which I can't say because I haven't been in that position, but I find that hard to understand. So I'd say you have to take it on a case-by-case basis. And also as well, I mean, I'm not saying that it's just kind of, that everything has to be extraterrestrial. That's one kind of hypothesis. But, there's also, there are a lot of other hypotheses as well. So I like the term kind of like non-human intelligence to kind of like, explain, because I believe, this is just me personally, my belief, it could be ET, there's some ET, there could be mixed in, because by definition, if you're traveling like these vast distances at near light speed, then, with relativity, you're a time traveler as well. Humans from the future, certainly, I believe that's very much a possibility, and I've spoken to a lot of scientists who do as well. Interdimensional, if you look at like a Skinwalker Ranch, something coming through a portal from like a parallel universe or another kind of dimension of existence, very possibly. So I don't think everything has to be ET. I think ET is just kind of like one possible hypothesis.
Well, one of the things that is often kind of like associated or thought by people looking at the kind of suppression of information about UFOs is that it's done for kind of technological or financial reasons. But there's another factor that I just want to get your thoughts about, that it's the revolutionary or social impact of extraterrestrials. That, for example, the kind of claims of the Space Brothers, wrong slide, if you bring up the other one, Jazz, the George Adamski. Or above top secret. The George Adamski case. I mean, friendly extraterrestrials visiting us, wanting to help us in terms of developing our spirituality, saying that we don't have a financial system, that everything is shared equitably. Now, this is something that has incredible kind of like social revolutionary implications, because imagine if the American government or the British government were releasing information from these extraterrestrials, these friendly space brothers that Adamski and many others were talking about, saying that, oh yeah, we have all this advanced technology and we don't have money and we share everything. I mean, wouldn't that be something that you would want to suppress if you're part of a kind of like an overtly capitalist society and you're locked in this kind of life and death struggle with a communist system, which seems to be much more similar to what Adamski's space brothers are talking about?
Yeah, I mean, there's that angle. I mean, I'm not convinced really by Adamski. There were certainly, worries, I know, in the 1950s. If you read some of Nick Redfern's work, what's it called? Flying saucers of the Kremlin, I think it is. And he's talking about, groups like Adamski, because they did have this sort of communist kind of like undertones, utopian kind of socialist undertones to the messages that they were giving about, the brothers from outer space or whatever it was, that worried the Americans. So yeah, if you're an overtly capitalist society, then maybe you would. And if you wanted to have a totalitarian society and you didn't want people to have those kind of those kind of freedoms, but I just don't know. But I don't put a lot of store in what Adamski said. I think he was kind of like riding the kind of UFO cult. And actually, it was quite interesting because Marshall Torsley as well. He was saying that there was some high ups. He actually talked about Boy Browning, who was this lieutenant general. He said, that he was totally he was very much into Adamski. But he said, I advised Boy Browning to stay away from him because he was a cultist.
Well, there's someone that I've been working with for a few years now, actually since 2008, and he's currently serving in the U.S. Army. And he's been giving me these reports about his off-planet missions and missions into the underground, large underground facilities. So he's been talking a lot about different types of extraterrestrials, human-looking extraterrestrials in particular. He's been talking about space fleets owned or flown by the by Space Force, Space Command. And I mean, sure, he's got his claims, but he's also got photos that I've released. So what do you make of those kinds of claims by individuals that are like outside of the box? I mean, you've got David Grush, you got Eric Davis, you got Bob Lazar, people talking about things that are, I think a lot of researchers can handle the idea that we've got crashed UFOs that are being studied and the technology is too advanced and we can't reverse engineer it. But people like JP and others saying that, oh no, there are these fleets of these craft and we've been going on missions off planet, and that there were these vast underground spaceports with different civilizations, and they've got some evidence. So how would you respond to that?
I want to see the evidence.
The photos. I mean,
and to be honest, and to be honest as well, I mean, I'm going to put much more store by what somebody like David Grush says. Given his background, given his seniority, given his established kind of intelligence community pedigree, given the fact that he's stood up in front of Congress, given the fact that he's made two separate, initiated two separate IG investigations. That's why I say, people ask me that they think, oh, why are you whistleblowing? Whatever, about that Daily Mail article. Well, one, I didn't want to be in the article. I was just they asked me if I could help them do some research, and then they ended up wanting to write an article about, what I knew about what this guy had claimed. But, I've never claimed that it's legit. I've just said, I believe the guy. I believe that he believes it, and he's a guy that I trust. But I have never said, oh, I can, it's 100% legit. It's Jen. So yeah, I'm very, very skeptical in that respect, and especially when people start making claims about, they're going 22 years into the future, time traveling, and then being returned to their body and all that kind of stuff. I'm just like, no, that's just bullshit, basically. So I have to see I very much have to see the proof, and I'm always going to go with somebody like Louis Elizondo, David Grush, Eric Davis, Hal Puthoff, John Alexander, people who've got like established pedigrees, rather than people who are making up these claims and don't have those kind of backgrounds.
Well, yeah, this is the problem, though, isn't it? I mean, those people that you just named, none of them have ever experienced firsthand these kinds of craft. And so as far as all of those individuals are concerned, like David Grush, I mean, he said that he hasn't been part of these programs. But we've got dozens of people who have been part of these programs. And just very recently, you have this 22-year Air Force veteran, Jason Sands, who's been getting a lot of interest because he's released his DD-214. It proves that he was an Air Force veteran for 22 years. That and he talks about this 20 and back program. Now, of course, I understand a lot of kind of major UFO researchers will say what you said, which is that, well, where's the evidence? But because we know that these programs are very highly classified, many of them are unacknowledged or waived special access programs or controlled access programs in the intelligence community. When you ask someone who's been in one of these programs, well, where's the evidence? Well, if they had any evidence, that would be illegal. They could be arrested. So, yeah, I mean, it seems to be a catch-22 because a lot of researchers will say, show me the evidence, but if they have the evidence, they could be arrested and put in the jail and key thrown away. So, yeah, how do you deal with that?
I see what you're saying, but if we're talking about Sands specifically, my information is that he claimed that he'd worked with the UAPTF. My information is nobody there has ever heard of him. So while his military background might be legit, I don't hold a lot of water in his claims about anything to do with space or space fleets or any of the rest of it. And I basically won't be watching any of his interviews. I won't be researching that because I just think it's too far-fetched. And I don't think it's legit. That's me personally. If something happens to change my mind, if somebody that I know and trust turns around to me and says, actually, Frank, you should check this out, then I will. But otherwise, I'm not, because there's just too many rabbit holes to go down. And if he has got, these legit claims, then why did he come out on a podcast? Why isn't he talking to someone like Chris Mellon and getting himself put up in front of one of the committees in Congress that actually has people cleared to hear that? I mean, if he doesn't want to go to ARO, and I understand why a lot of people don't trust ARO. So I'm not slagging the bloke down. I'm just saying, why come out on a podcast? And if these things are legit, why aren't you talking to Congress about it in a classified setting? So that's where it is, for me.
Okay.
I think we're going the right. I think we're going the right direction. We're very much going the right direction with people who have worked on in government programs, even if they haven't directly seen, like the goodies themselves, like the craft or whatever. I keep, for example, I keep a very open mind. A lot of people slag down, what's his face from Area 51, Bob Lazar. Yeah. I mean, I keep an open mind about that because I actually like George Knapp. He and I get on well, and also because he's got a reputation that he's put on the line. But again, I can't verify it, so I don't know. So I'm not going to go chasing down information about Bob Lazar. I'm much more going to be looking at what Grush says and what happens with further down the line with people coming to Congress and talking about it under oath. Because there's so many people like who've made claims, and you get pulled in too many different directions otherwise, and you've only got a certain amount of time. To spend on the topic. So I prefer to spend it on looking at the FOIA stuff that other people harvest, talking to people who've been on the inside, and also trying to use sort of logic. But the whole 20 years and back thing, I just find that really hard to swallow. I believe that there's time travel, but I think forward time travel is a lot more difficult than rearwards time travel. I believe that if time travel is possible, it's not going to be. This is just a personal opinion. Us using it now, there may be somebody who has time travel capability, but I think it would be more likely to be and more logically to be future humans who are maybe 50, 100 or 200 years down the line and have actually cracked rearwards time travel, rather than some guy talking about, I went 20 years into the future and then I came back and I was aged the same as when I left. I mean, and what happens when the guy's gone? Do they make a clone of him and they sort of sit there and pretend that he hasn't left? I mean, it opens up more questions than it answers.
Can we look forward to any new papers, or is there some other book project or anything like that in the pipeline?
Books, no. I kind of want to keep it think tanks at the moment. I'm going along with research. I'm still very interested in kind of like the military side, and the whole crash retrieval and reverse engineering side of it. So I want to continue in that direction. I don't want to just spew out stuff that's kind of like in the UAP news. I want to do what I do, which, without being arrogant, I think you should stick to the things that you do best, and that's kind of like looking like more on the analysis side. So I'm still very much interested in the threat aspect of it and what it could be. And as always, I keep an open mind because I'm always learning stuff from different people. So you're always learning the whole time. And always generating more questions than you have answers, right? That's the problem with the topic.
So do you have a website, or if people wanted to contact you, you want to give them any?
I don't. I mean, I'm pretty private, to be honest. I'm on Twitter. I'm on Facebook, but I don't do Facebook much. People can friend me if they want. I don't accept a lot of friend requests. I used to have an email which I put out, but I got too many kooks and weirdos kind of pinging me, so I just thought I don't need any of that. I've got the people that I like to talk to, scientists, military people, whatever, experiencers, people like yourself, other researchers. So if people want to report cases, then there's guys like Jeremy Corbell who'll do that, or ping Liberation Times, or ping the Daily Mail. If you've got a legit case. But me, I'm just kind of plugging along. So I tend to reach out to people rather than have people reach out to me.
Fantastic. Well, you've been a wealth of information, so thanks for being on Exopolitics Today.
Likewise, Michael, thank you very much. It was a real honor to be invited on, because I've been looking at your work for some time, and you certainly got a very interesting educational background, so it was very interesting for me too.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You have been listening to Exopolitics Today with Dr. Michael Salla. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Join or start a conversation in the comments. Take the time to explore the vast library of best-selling books, webinars, and podcasts by Dr. Salla. Visit exopoliticstoday.com.